Ray Grist, pleased to speak with you about your experiences with Cinque and about your career. And again, Cinque opened in 1969, and I understand that you had the second solo show at the institution. So my first questions are around that show. I'm wondering, how did you hear about Cinque? Who invited you to be in the show at Cinque? And just give us some of your personal experiences of how that all transpired.
Well, as I remember, I probably first heard about Cinque through Reggie Gammon. Reggie and I were very close friends. He had an apartment just below mine on East 9th Street. And Reggie introduced me directly to Rudy Bearden. And it was Romy who invited me to show at Cinque while it was still public theater. I grew up knowing actually quite a few artists through my sister, Rudy Grist, who is a singer. Roy Dickerava, Langston Hughes, Leonard Bernstein, Cheetah Rivera, Eartha Kitt, a lot of people basically through her. Bob Blackburn I've known since I was 9 years old. And so it's a little bit fuzzy who introduced me to whom, because I've known all of these people basically all my life. But at any rate, it was certainly Romy that invited me to show at Cinque. Well, I was in, as Anke alluded to, I was in Austria before coming to Cinque. And when I came back, I had a body of work to show, as well as pieces that I had been doing here before going to Austria. In Austria was the first time after many years of painting that I had shown my works to anyone. So when I came to Cinque, it was the first time that I had shown my works here in New York or in this country. And it was very exciting for me to do that. I remember that the gallery at that point was a very small space right outside of Joseph Papp's office. It wasn't a very big room. It was more like an anteroom. Chris Shelton was at that point the director, curator of the gallery. And that's pretty much what I remember. We had a really nice opening. And it went on from there.
Excellent.
I think I showed about 10 to 12 pieces.
I was going to ask you about the work, yes, because we do have some of the images. And right now I'm looking at an untitled piece that has layers of pigment. And I'm wondering if you would talk to us about that work from 1969.
Well, that piece, I was trying at that time to really just open up the painting, to open myself up to the pieces, to become more expressive, instead of being, how could I describe it then, pretty much vertical and horizontal. Even that piece remained pretty much vertical and horizontal, but it was a little more open than a lot of the others. In Austria, that opening up started to happen. I have to talk a little bit about that experience, because it was a very, very unique, very special experience in Austria. This was it was called International Symposium, and it was a gathering of painters and sculptors from many countries in the world. My studio was the orangerie of the Duke of Esterhazy's castle, which was very, very large. I walked in and the walls were lined with canvases, all of which were 10 feet by 6 feet. Anything that we asked for, we were given. And it was just a time when, as it was introduced to me, when one could do whatever you wanted to do with no questions asked. And anything was provided. So that it was kind of challenging to do that. But it did afford a kind of spiritual or psychological or emotional opening, which could continue once I came back to New York.
I think I see that a great deal in the other piece, Orgasmic Explosion.
That's what I was going to get to next. That was the piece where I really just tried to make an explosion. And it did happen. It became explosive, yes.
Right. And what do you recall about the actual opening night, though, at Cinque? Back to Cinque now. What do you call in terms of the people who came and the response?
Well, the opening, there was like all of the other openings. I don't really remember who came except for the directors of the gallery, the creators of the gallery, Romy and Ernie, and all of those people. A lot of other artists were there because it was new. The gallery was new. So, and it was mainly, the audience was mainly largely Black. Again, because it was new. It was celebratory because that and the Studio Museum were basically the only places for us to show in New York.
Yeah, so true. And again, this is on the heels of the civil rights movement also. So just a lot of excitement and changes going on in the city. Again, with the Studio Museum opening up also and the Harlem School of the Arts. The arts really began to flourish, I think, in Manhattan at this period in time. But tell me about the community of artists that were there. Were they, supportive of you? Did you grow within that community? What was the networking like? What was going on in the community at the time?
Well, you just jogged a little bit of my memory with what you've just said. Mm-hmm. I think that a lot of the impetus for Cinque, for Harlem School of the Arts, for things like that, was the confrontation that happened with the Metropolitan Museum, mm-hmm. from Black artists demanding more time, more space at the museum, which was very cautiously given on their part. It wasn't really an exhibition, but rather a photo exhibition. But something, and a small attempt was made. And I think, I can't swear to it, but I think that the creators of the Cinque probably felt the need to say, okay, we have to do something on our own, and got together to create Cinque. What was the community of artists like? Well, it was small, new, because there wasn't really any spaces for us to show in. So we had to, I don't know how to quite put it, but we weren't connected terribly well, or at least I felt. I knew people, as I said before, like Bob Blackburn, Roy DeCarava. I'm trying to think of a couple of other people who I knew quite well, whose names right now escape me. I remember hanging out with a small group of people, going down to bother Bob Blackburn when he had his studio under the Brooklyn Bridge. And he was fairly newly in his workshop. Ronald Joseph was one of them. Can't think of the other guy's name right now. But those are the artists that I knew, along with, as I said, Langston Hughes and people in theater through my sister. The painters I started to meet after the Cinque show and after the Studio Museum show. But that came, I met the other Black painters slowly after those shows.
Interesting.
And they were very supportive, by the way.
Good.
But again, as I said, I've known Blackburn, for instance, and Ronald Joseph since I was like 8 or 9 years old. So that I didn't think of it in terms of being supportive. They were just people that I knew and the world in which I grew up.
So there was a sense that you were not alone. In other words, you knew that there were other African Americans that were working hard at their artwork.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which I think for a young mind is very comforting too, you know, knowing that there are others before you.
Well, it wasn't necessarily comforting as it was natural.
Okay, because that's what you knew. Yeah.
That's what I knew, right.
Grew up with, yeah. I recall my mother taking me to that Metropolitan show. And I remember there were some Vandersea photos, I think, but the disappointment was that, yes, there were no paintings, there were no sculptures by African Americans. It was
Right.
these over life-size photos. They blew up the photos. I think it was really to take up space more than anything else. You know, because you don't blow up a Vandersea. The Vanderseas are gorgeous. They're intimate. You want to come in close, but they blew everything up.
Right.
So it was very strange. I do recall that. And again, I was probably in junior high school at that time. But so, you know, I'm looking at the work Dream Improvisation, talking about Bob Blackburn. It looked to me as though this was a piece that may have been a print.
Well, it was a print. It started as a print, but it didn't come from Blackburn's studio. I studied etching first at Blackburn's studio, but then I had my studio at that point was on 27th Street between 7th and 8th Avenues, right in the block with FIT. FIT had not expanded at that point. But right next door to my studio, Muhammad Khalil had his studio.
Yes.
And I could literally go from the rooftop of my building through his window into his studio.
Yeah.
And I spent 13 years working in Muhammad's studio. I offered to apprentice myself to him. And he said, there's a stool over there, you sit on it, don't bother me, I have work to do. Which I did for several months and just watched him doing his prints. Finally, he got tired of me sitting there and said, here's the plate, go do some work.
Yeah.
And as I said, I spent the next 13 years doing that. There was a whole series of pieces like the Dream Improvisation, which came from proofs that I did while I was working on various pieces. And I didn't want to throw the paper away. The paper was still good as far as I was concerned. And I thought, okay, I can do lots of improvisations because I had the same basic image over and over and over again. And I could do a lot of improvisations on that image as paintings or along with paintings, which is what happened with those. They were, that image was there and I could just improvise. Again, it was always a way of wanting to be open, to open more, to give more to it, to try more, to whatever.
Mm. So what we're seeing, I guess, is sort of like an etching with the aquatint, and then the color is you coming in after the print has been done and then adding other elements to it. In other words, this is the improvisational aspect of the work.
Right.
And I think a lot of artists have done that. I think of William T. Williams, I think, who's also done, I've done that on many occasions.
Sure.
I've even, discarded prints and ended up taking them out of the trash and collaging them and making new things out of them.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely. Now, when you talk about Muhammad Khalil also, that brings me back to Pratt. He was a professor there for many years.
Yes.
In printmaking. So these are all master printmakers, of course, including Bob Blackburn. Looking now at some of the work that comes a little closer to today, I'm looking at one of your flowers. It's the white rose.
Yes.
Done in 2019, you said. Talk to us about, was this a series that you did or?
Yes, and it continues.
Mm-hmm.
That came about in, I guess, a couple of years ago in 2018, two things happened. Firstly, I broke my leg so that I was very limited in movement, so that I now have a titanium rod in my left leg. Then while I was standing in a doctor's office waiting to be treated with this leg, I had a studio in Freeport in a building where I was the only tenant. And while I was standing in the doctor's office waiting to be treated by the doctor, the landlord called me and said he wanted me to move out of the studio because he was then going to rent the entire building to one tenant. And I said, I can't talk to you right now because my leg is broken and I'm going in to see the doctor. So we had to deal with that, but that was okay. Eventually, I did move out of the studio and into the house that we have, my wife and I have here in South Hempstead, and put my studio on the summer porch of the house, very graciously through her, because that was her pride and joy, just to sit there in the summertime. But it also meant that I had access to the garden. We have a very large garden here, and with lots and lots of flowers. And again, because the leg was broken, which limited my movement, and access to these landscapes and to the flowers, I just started doing flowers, which I had actually done over many, many years, going back to the early 70s when I lived in Portugal and was doing flowers then. So that call it a series, but a subject matter more that I've done for 30 or 40 years. And currently, I think there are close to 20 different flowers, and I'll continue them. In fact, I have one on a table, a big yellow hibiscus, a watercolor that I've been trying to get to for several weeks now, and will when my new studio is done.
Well, speaking of that sun porch, I think the piece later in the day that I'd like to focus on right now is probably a piece that was done on that porch. It appears to be a doorway that goes out to your garden, in fact. Can you talk to us about that piece?
What that piece is, it's a bit of a story. Charles Searles and I were very friendly. You remember Charles Searles. When Charles had his house up in the country, when he first got the house up in the country, he got excited by going out into the woods and finding large branches and painting them. And I thought that was a really, really cool idea, painting these big branches. But what Charles did, he just painted them, and they were like staffs, and they just stood there. Well, I thought that's a cool idea, but I don't want to do what Charles did. So when I came here to my garden, we have lots and lots of trees, far too many trees here. And I started collecting branches, and I thought, okay, what can I do with these branches? Unlike Charles, I just didn't want to make a stick that was going to stand up and would be painted. I had done a painting. We also have an apartment in Brooklyn, and in our bedroom, there's a painting which was I call it a collaboration. Actually, it was a theft of a drawing that was done by my son-in-law, my stepson's children when they were little children, when they were like 2 and 3 years old. And I looked at their drawings and I said, oh, this is pretty good. I'm going to steal these. And I did, and I made paintings which were like children's. One of them, which hangs in the bedroom in Brooklyn, is a joy to wake up to in the morning. It hangs right in front of our bed. It's a joy to wake up to. So when I came here with the sticks, I thought, well, I can do something with that. I discovered heavy Mylar. And I thought, this would be pretty cool. I always wanted to paint on glass so that I could have light coming through the glass, as well as bouncing off of the glass. And I thought, this is pretty cool. I can paint on both sides of the Mylar, have light in all directions, and then I can take the sticks which I'd paint, tie them together so that it would be like a frame, put the Mylar in the middle along with other kinds of things, and make a big assemblage, which I could then put in front of a window or a doorway so that this hangs with light coming through it transparently or like hitting it in an opaque way. When it's translucent, it's full of light. When it's opaque, it's dark. So that I have the morning piece, which hangs in the bedroom in Brooklyn, and the later in the day piece, which hangs here when it's dark out. And all I see is the dark front side of it, which is nighttime.
Interesting you talk
and it combines this desire to paint the sticks, to paint the branches, and just to go somewhere else. Again, to be more open, to do something else, to do something new. And that's opened up a whole new series of things that I'm doing. I keep thinking as soon as my studio is ready, which hopefully will be next month, I can go run in there and collect all these sticks that I've been collecting, these branches that I've been collecting, and start painting those and start doing many, many more things. Assemblages.
You mentioned bringing new things to the work, new elements in your assemblages. And I'm thinking right now of your Mylars, because of course I've been working with Mylar since the 1990s. I love the surface. How do you feel about the surface? You talked a little bit about it already, but there's just something wonderful about painting on that smooth surface. And the fact that there's no porous aspect to it, that it sits right on top of it because it's plastic basically, you know, so what you put down is what you get.
Well, I'm more interested in the translucency and transparency of it. Mm-hmm. I've tried to, for many years, paint on very hard, smooth surfaces for different reasons. One of the things I learned from Bearden's watercolors, was how he could make the paint bleed in the watercolor. And I thought that's a really cool thing to do. And I started to do that using oils, but I'd need to have a very hard, flat surface to make it bleed instead of being absorbed by the canvas. So I put the paint on and then squirt it with alcohol, denatured alcohol, and it bleeds like crazy, which I like to do. So that the Mylar, I did that with the Mylar, but I was much more interested in the translucency and the transparency of the Mylar than in the hard surface.
Yeah, I'm not speaking about it in terms of just a hard surface, but the act of not absorbing whatever you put down. Yeah. Of course, with paper and canvas, even a primed canvas is going to absorb.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
The paint. Right. What you put down is truly what you get.
Yes, yeah. You know,
you talk about Rudy Bearden. What are some of the stories that you remember about Bearden, being around Bearden? Because he was a great storyteller. Is there anything that you recall of him, something that he did or said?
Well, Romy and I didn't really hang out a great deal. I mean, I would see the one experience with Romy really stays in my mind. This was when he had his big retrospective at the Brooklyn Museum. I went there one day, one afternoon, just to walk through, and was walking through, and these two young girls, college age, were there. Two young white girls were there, and Romy was there. And they were walking through, and they saw Romy, and I was close enough to them to hear what they had to say. And they saw Romy and they said, "Oh, that's Rudy Bearden. Well, he didn't look too black." And that's the one memory that really stays with me with Romy.
He was very fair-skinned. He could pass.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But now tell me about...
but there were many others. I mean,
other stories.
Reggie Gammon and Romy were really good friends. When Romy started out making the Xeroxes, he was working as a social worker. He and his wife, Nanette, were working in welfare. And they had access to a new Xerox machine. And he would make the collages and take them to the office and Xerox them. So they'd come out as black and white prints. And he would take them and sell them. in the street on 125th Street for little amounts of money.
Mhm.
Well, Nanette didn't like that too much, so she wanted him to stop. And he gave a whole bunch of them to Reggie Gammon, to keep for him away from Nanette. And Reggie, as I said, Reggie lived one floor above me. Reggie didn't want to get caught with these things, so he gave them to me to hold for him. I said, sure, I'll hold them. And after, I don't know, a long period of time, I don't know how long it was, he asked for them. He asked for them back. I think that was the point when, by that time, Romy was really, his reputation was really getting going, and he realized he could make money out of these things. And I guess Romy asked them to be returned, and I had to return them to Reggie. Yeah. And I've always thought, damn, were you a fool to give those things back? You could have taken off 2 or 3 of them.
At least 2 or 3.
That's right. But I had to give them back.
Yeah. And you, just going back a bit, you're talking about Charles Searles. I want to ask you, is there a community of artists that you are associated with today? Are there people that come by your studio to give you feedback, or you go to their studios, or, what kind of exchanges are going on now for you?
Well, that kind of activity used to happen when I had a studio, but I haven't had a studio, but I soon will. And hopefully next month I'll have a beautiful studio. Yes, there has been that kind of community. In the late 80s, I guess, early 90s, we formed a group called the Powwow Group, which was myself, Adjit Cowens, Charles Searles, David Hammonds, George Mingo, Michael Singletary, Tyrone Mitchell, Arthur Kopedge, Herb Bennett, and probably I'm missing a few other names here and there. And we met regularly. We even did communal pieces together. And we created a magazine, which I produced, because I was the only one who had a computer at the time. And this was in the early days of desktop publishing. The magazine was called Jump, and I think we did 6 or 7 editions. We gave it away, and it was very exciting to do, and it was really a very exciting little publication. And each of the artists as part of that was in the Powwow Group would be featured in an issue. Along with other kinds of things. We had fashion. Corinne Simpson was the fashion editor. We had an international section. My daughter at the time was living in Nairobi, and I made her my African correspondent. She was sending articles about Makonde and other kinds of pieces from Africa. It was really quite a good publication. The back end of it featured photographers. Then this was actually in the 70s. In the early 70s, I guess 74, my sister invited me to go and live she had a vacation home in Lisbon. And right after the revolution, the persons who had vacation homes in Portugal had to have them protected because of all of the Portuguese who were returning from Africa and from the other colonies, because once they got back to Portugal, they had nowhere to go. So they would just move into these empty vacation homes. And my sister invited me to go and stay in her home. And I wound up staying there over a period of about 15 years, back and forth. So I stopped doing the magazine. When I came back to New York, I picked it up as a TV show. And I did 65 shows. all on public television with the same format. An artist would be issued each time. There would be a travel section. There would be another, various sections. It was a half-hour show. It was a lot of fun to do. And it formed, again, a community of artists of all kinds, photographers, fashion designers, writers, video artists. That lasted until, I guess, mid-'80s, early '90s or so. Mm-hmm. And then it stopped. But the community didn't stop. We all continue. I don't, as I said, I don't go to people's studios. They don't come here. When I did have the studio in Freeport, part of the studio I used as a gallery. It was called the Omni Contemporary Gallery. And I guess over I don't remember, I had maybe the studio for about 4 or 5 years. I must have done half a dozen shows, which featured the works of other people. But because it's out on Long Island, the artists that I knew that are in New York were hesitant to travel so far on the Long Island Railroad to come out and visit. But they will.
Sounds great. So Ray, what is your plan now for the future? You're talking about your studio getting set up. You're talking about continuing with the flower paintings. What else is on your mind? I would imagine with you not being able to work right now, there's a lot that's going on.
There's an awful lot. There's
a whole lot of images. What's going on in your mind now?
Well, I want to continue doing the assemblages.
Okay.
I have, I don't know, 6 or 7 in my head now. I was saying last night I should make drawings of them so they're not just in my head.
Okay.
There are still paintings that I'd love to do. A friend of mine, actually the man who's building the studio, who lives in Alameda, California, was here, discovered, he's a playwright, and he, for many years, did video as well. A fairly successful playwright. He's had a number of plays. I think he's had 10 plays down at La Mama. He's a master builder here. He has told me that he wants to open a place in Alameda, and he wants me to come out and do the video work for him. We'll see, but that's curious for me. But yeah, the studio is going to be there, and it's going to be wonderful, and I'll do a lot of work.
Yeah, sounds wonderful.
There's the studio is being built over the garage. We took the second level off of the garage and putting a whole new level on. Part of the code is that it had to be attached to the house. And so there'll be a doorway going from the studio directly into the house, which I've told my wife I'm going to put a lock on and a sign. Do not disturb.
But that means you don't have to go outside to go to your studio,
I don't have to go outside.
That's right. That's right. Wonderful. Listen, thank you, Ray. And thanks for your important historical perspective on Cinque Gallery and information about your own background and career. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Nanette.
Yes.
And I thank the Art Students League. And by the way, I spent many years at the Art Student League studying.
Okay. Oh, good. Very good. Well, Ray, we go back a ways. I think I probably met you in the 80s.
Yes. It might even have been in the 70s.
Cinque. It may have been at Cinque. That's right.
Yes, I'm sure.
That's right. That's right. But thanks again, Ray. Thanks so much for the time. Anki King. Thank you. Thank you. Anki, back to you.
Well, thank you so much, Nanette and Ray, for this very inspiring insight into both Cinque and your work, Ray, and all the connections you made. I would also love to know, who did you study with at the Art Students League?
Oh, one guy. No, that was at the new school. I studied with a man whose name I don't remember. but when I started, I was very, very interested in Cézanne's works, because for me, Cézanne was the grandfather of modern painting, with all of his conceptual rules and whatever. And I studied with a man who also was a Cézannist. But after a few months, it was Cézanne, Cézanne, Cézanne. We had to paint like Cézanne. After a while, I got tired of it. But I did do pieces that if people would walk into the apartment in Brooklyn and say, "How did you get a Cézanne?" Because the works are very much reminiscent of the time with this man, but I forget his name.
Okay, we might be able to dig in our records and find that out.
Maybe.
Yeah. And another quick question from me at the end. Were there any other people that you were around and inspired by, maybe, that were also connected with Cinque, that would talk about Cinque back those days?
Well, yes, Norman Lewis, one of the creators of Cinque. I remember one day being at Norman's studio, and he said to me, Norman was kind of how could I put it, a dour, sometimes a very dour person, very serious man, sometimes dour, a little scary sometimes. He said to me, "You know, we've been watching you." I said, "What do you mean you've been watching me?" He said, "Yeah, we've been watching you. You've got a lot of talent."
No, good. Yeah.
And I was also very close to Hale Woodruff. I have a little, and when I was going, another little story, when I was going to move to Portugal, I went to Hale and I said, "Hale, I'm going to move to Portugal. It's getting too difficult here, blah, blah, blah. My sister's invited me." He said, "Oh, well, Ray, before you go, I want to buy something from you." I said, "What? You can't buy anything from me, Hale." I said, "I'll give you work. You can't buy anything from me. You can't pay anything." "No, I'll give you." He said, "No, I insist on buying." I said, "No, I insist on giving." "No, I insist on buying." Well, what happens, of course? Nothing. We wind up not making any exchange.
Oh, that's
What is
wonderful.
the things you learn?
Yes. Oh,
Yeah, so thank you so much. This has been so meaningful to learn about all this. And I really appreciate you both taking the time to give us these wonderful stories and for us to learn so much about this. So thank you to Nanette and to Ray. And then I would just want to finish up by letting everybody know that for more programs and information on art classes and these kind of interviews and lectures and programs, you can see our website, theartstudentsleague.org. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much.